For each talk on the Khanda, the aggregates, we've had the opportunity to explore what the aggregates mean as a whole, what the teaching is, why it's important, and to explore each individual aggregate so far with rupa or form, vedana, feeling, and today sanya, perception. And to do so both in our guided silent practice and in insight dialogue, coming as experience near as we can, to be intimate with the teachings, to touch what we can of, you might say, what feels real or immediate or somehow actual. The value of multiple talks and introducing the aggregates in a fresh way each time is it gives us a chance to perhaps begin to touch the breadth and depth of this teaching and maybe gain some sense of why the Buddha taught it so frequently. It was so central. As we've said, it was central to the definition. It is the very definition of dukkha, that which suffers, that which is the sort of the heart of it, this experiencing body-mind. And it's a way of giving us some orientation in the sea of the lived experience of just being a conscious being. Remembering that really we're talking about the fluxing, the continuous changing of the body-mind, of the organism, and its encounter with the world, and that any attempt to say anything about this sea of experience, you might say, is already to begin to analyze or abstract it. And that analysis is not actuality. It's simply a way of helping us reflect on experience so that we can understand the nature of unsatisfactoriness and the ending of that. That's the whole point. It's not a conversation about how things actually are in some objective scientific sense. Even so, as one might imagine, there's a link that we can make to lived experience, to what's measurable, to science, to biology, psychology, all that stuff, because it is this insightful way of clustering experience. This centrality, or shall we say the generality, maybe that's really the word, the generality of the teachings on the aggregates is maybe you can understand from this, the Buddha referring to these aggregates as an abode. So he says, how householder does one roam about in an abode? By diffusion and confinement in the abode, consisting in the sign of forms. And then he goes on, the sign of feelings, perceptions, formations, and consciousness. One is called one who roams about in an abode. The signs of forms, the signs. What does that mean? The indications, the manifestations, the manifesting of forms, the manifesting of feelings, of perceptions. And we roam about in that, as if it is real and we have an abode. Sounds pretty simple when you understand that. So here we are roaming about in this body mind. Oh yeah, this is definitely home. And of course, then that's me, that's I am. And as the Buddha says, he lives obsessed by the notion I am form, or I am, today's work, perception. And perception is mine. As he lives obsessed by these notions, that perception of his changes. And we'll look at that experientially. You can see if perception is solid or fixed, or if it's changing. That perception changes and alters. Of course it does, right? We know that. With the change and alteration of perception, there arise in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. Can't hang on to it. It's going to change. And then from another discourse, and with the change and alteration of form, his perception becomes preoccupied with the change of form, agitation, and a constellation of mental states born of preoccupation with the change of form, obsessing his mind. Because his mind is obsessed, he is frightened, distressed, and anxious. And through clinging rather, he becomes agitated. So we can see this causal chain in this abode. And by the way, the abode was also referred to as the burden. Bhikkhus, I will teach you the burden. I will teach you the burden. The carrier of the burden. Guess who that is? The taking up of the burden and the laying down of the burden. Listen to that. And what, bhikkhus, is the burden? It should be said, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. So we've taken up this house, this burden, also referred to as the root of misery. He says in another discourse, bhikkhus, I will teach you the root of misery, right? So we take it up and we wear it as a solid thing. And this form is me. That's my abode. These feelings are me. These perceptions are me. This history, these volitional formations, this constructing is me. And consciousness, knowing the world, is me. Put it all together and it's a complete picture of me. No problem. Until, of course, it's a problem, which is the instant it changes, which is of course, every instant. And so it's unstable, right? It's fragile. And what, bhikkhus, is the fragile and what is the unfragile? Now, this is interesting. Form, feelings, perceptions, and so on, is fragile. Its cessation, subsiding, passing away, is the unfragile. So this whole abode, this burden that we carry about and fixate and identify with, is fragile. But the constant dissolution of it, that's not fragile. That's for sure. That's going to happen for sure. No contest, right? Fragile, unfragile, crush, suffering. So without maturing, releasing beyond the lust and the holding and the identification for these perceptions, these constructions, this consciousness, there's no making an end of suffering. Because without directly knowing and fully understanding form and perception, without becoming dispassionate towards it and abandoning it. One is incapable of destroying suffering. It's pretty central. The way these khandhas interweave and work together is something that we'll be exploring in just a moment when we move into our silent practice, our guided silent practice. And the general, you might say, dynamic of the khandhas is that they are inextricably interwoven. That is to say, they sit and engage and inter-are with each other. And so we can tease them apart only to a certain extent. But because we can do that, we can focus the mind. We can kind of relax at the perch of perception. To give you a sense of that while I'm talking, let me ask you this. How are you understanding these words I'm saying? What's actually happening as I speak? And as you hear, as you listen? How do words crystallize into something that you say, I know what Gregory's talking about. And it's happening right now. So observe the mind as I speak. Can you even come close to catching how quickly sound becomes word and word becomes meaning? And here we are at the perch of perception, where sound is touching the ear, there's contact, and with contact, there's feeling. So there's from the bareness of contact, there's some sort of pleasant or unpleasant or neutral experience of hearing consciousness. Hearing is happening as I'm speaking. Hearing is happening. And effectively, instantaneously, hearing is hearing features in the flux of sound. And the features that you're hearing, let's pay attention to them. There's the quality of voice that is low or high pitched. There's the quality of voice that is smooth or rough. These are features of sound that are perceived, just as you perceive colors in light. And those features, the changing vowels and the stops of the consonants and so on, form, when they touch the mind, perception of words. Language is born. And then the mapping to the meaning of those words, again, effectively instantaneous. And right now, as you observe as much as you're able, as I'm speaking, and you're hearing speaking and you're hearing words, the process of perception is at work. And can you just watch perceiving happening? Can you watch perceiving happening? Can you know it? Be mindful of it. Even as you still understand the meaning of these words, the very process of understanding the meaning of the words is observing the flow of perception. And of course, the feeling tone that happens with it. And looking to the other side, the formations or the volitional formations or the background that you bring to this moment is also activated by these words. All of the, let's say, relationship to Gregory or relationship to Buddha Dhamma or something like that. The mood of the mind, the tone, the emotional tone is being constantly pinged by the language, by the voice itself. Trust and distrust, love, aversion, all of these things are being pinged, resonating. But it's the perception that is the kind of the birthplace of the understanding that's doing the pinging. So you're observing, perceiving now. And if you care to open your eyes, if they're closed, and look at the screen, perhaps you see, I'm not sure exactly what image you see, but let's assume that it's an image of this body, the Greg body, and whatever is in the room. And once again, what we have is a fluxing process, bare stimulus, contact, feeling arises conjointly with perception of colors, forms, visual forms, lines and curves and spaces, and objects. Objects are perceived. Human being, face, eyes, chairs and walls and so on. And the compelling power of these perceptions invoke then the sankharas, the whole history. But let's just stay with this perching at the edge of perception here, kind of watching, perceiving happening. So there's seeing, and there's this Greg, and the forms, and you could try to see the image without seeing the Greg. Painters and other artists, visual artists, do that all the time. Can I just see the bare form? Just as musicians all the time listen to streams of sound, can I just hear the sound? Does it have to be an oboe or a human voice or a bird? And here you are, perceiving this flow of words and this seeing. And then you might just check out while you're at it. Is there rupa, sort of the arena of the experience of form of the body, of hardness and softness and liquids of the body? So this might be a good time then to kind of drop down to another approach and let the eyes close if you care to. I think it's a good idea. And once again, notice the sitting form. And the sitting form is a perception. Let's be clear about that. This sitting body is a perception. But let's just see if we can just touch something more direct and experiential, like the sense of density or hardness against the cushion or the chair. And letting the body be erect and comfortable. And you can feel in that erectness, there's firmness, there's the hardness of rupa. Wherever it's noticed. And wherever the other qualities of form, like its liquidity, the water element, so to speak, you might notice that in the mouth or just in the suppleness of the body. Just the direct, bare data. And this bare data of rupa, dhatu, elements, playing across this arena. There's the contact with the sense bases, contact with the ears, with this sound, the sound of the voice, contact. Perhaps there's light coming in through the eyelids if your eyes are closed. It's contact with the body, felt contact. Perhaps you're noticing nose or tongue contact. Perhaps not. And there's mind contact, touch. And with contact, playing across this arena of the body is feeling. You might just notice what feelings are prominent. Pleasant feelings may be prominent in one place or another. Unpleasant feelings may be prominent in one place or another. And feelings that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant may be noticed. It's more subtle. Take your time and see for yourself. Feelings like bubbles. You might see. Can they be held on to? Do they last? See for yourself, wherever they are. And do the feelings arise or come to be known? Distinct, separate from form? What's the relationship there? Between the form and its densities and liquidities and so on, and feeling, how are you knowing form is there? Does any of it become fixated? Does it hold still for you? See if you find anything that holds still. Or it might be more relaxing to see if you find anything that is impermanent, that is flowing, changing. And in this fluxing of form and fluxing of feeling, is there any sense of there is a body, that the form has this quality of shape or objectness? It is an object, the body. Perhaps you could be specific. Let's say the hands. And what are the hands? What is the experience? Could this be a perception? An object being formed out of the flux of contact? Can you notice the objectness, the object-like quality of the hands? Or perhaps you prefer the arms. The arms have a shape. Perceived as an object. Or perhaps even the whole torso. A percept of torso, of body, the trunk of the body. The neck or the head, just percepts. The legs, percepts. Explore for yourself what's here. Perceiving as an ongoing flow, this and that. The body as perception. And you might notice that in this perceived body, that there can be discerned perhaps this other lens shows us feeling. There's pleasant and unpleasant feelings, rising and vanishing. And it helps to stabilize the mind if you find a particular experience of feeling that is prominent. Let's say if it's neutral, it might be just something like feeling your hands or feeling your face or your head. Or if it's perhaps you have a pain somewhere, that can be very compelling. Just notice the pain in that area. Don't label it pain, just experience. Or perhaps the touching of the feet on the floor or the body on the chair, whatever it is that is prominent felt experience here and now. Take your time. Just letting attention relax and settle there. And now let's do the inquiry. Do you notice the form, the solidity, any sense of material reality or sense of bare hardness, liquidity, the gases and movement, temperature, caloricity of just that. What about the feeling itself, the pleasant or unpleasant or neutral feeling? Perched with Vedana feeling. The fluxing of Vedana. Change, instability, impermanence, flow. And now you could investigate. Is there a perception there? Is there an object? Is this a certain part of the body? Or are there certain qualities like warmth and movement or something perceived? There's a sign, an indication, a manifesting of that quality. Ah, it's this thing, this quality. Or simply this object. The back, the feet, the hands, the head, whatever it is. And is there anything in there that's stable, or do you perceive change, transience? And is this experiencing, this thing being experienced, is it under your control? Could you make it do anything you want? Can the pain be forced to stop, or the pleasure be forced to continue by will? Can the aging process be stopped? And if it is not under your control, can you call it mine? Can you call it me? Or is it just happening? Flow of perceptions with each contact, each instant. So the form, the rupa, is impermanent. Rupam anicam. Vedana anicam. The feelings impermanent. Vedana anicam. Vedana. Perceptions impermanent. Sanyam anicam. Sanyam anicam. And not under our control, not as we want it. It's just a feature, a fact of this experience. Rupa, dukkham. Form is unsatisfactory. Suffering when we cling. Vedanam dukkham. Sanya dukkham. Doesn't matter if sanya is a pleasant perception or an unpleasant perception. It still is out of control, unsatisfactory. And we cling to control, we cling to these objects, we cling to these words. Look at the sanya, the perceptions unfolding to the mind. Thoughts as objects, words coming out of your own fabricating process. Sanyam, Anicham, these perceptions are impermanent. Sanya, to come, never satisfactory, out of control. Sanyam, Anatam, perceptions are not self. Just the flow of Sanya. Not me, not mine. Can the body mind relax and receive with equanimity this impermanent changing experience of the khandha, of the aggregates? Without clinging. Without clinging. Nothing to hold on to, and not even anything to do the holding on. Simply known as a process that clings to itself, and the clinging begins to relax. In just a moment, I'll be inviting you into groups of two for some insight dialogue practice. But first, I'll offer the contemplation. After I offer the contemplation, we'll have 20 minutes for the dialogue. And we'll come back together. I'll name the time at that moment. It'll be something like a quarter after the hour. We're going to give particular attention in our interpersonal practice to sanya, to perception, and the perceiving process. And there's a couple of aspects that I'd like to particularly invite you to investigate in direct experience. Both are built on this the perceiving of qualities and objects that make up what is perception. And one is the qualities, the objects associated directly with language. So you'll begin with, of course, bare sensing and the objects you notice. But there's also, you might notice that words are being associated with these objects. Whether it's that person or that person's nose or eye or something like this, like teaching a child to speak. Or it might simply be brown or orange or white or yellow. And as your partner is speaking, you're receiving this gift of actual direct language, which is conveyed via sound, words, and then the meanings of those words and the objects they refer to. And here you are, right in the middle of it. We're in the middle of it now. It becomes invisible to us so quickly. But the other piece is to notice if the mind is pushed this way or that into proliferation, papancha. If the mind sort of goes off, and sometimes in interpersonal practice with the functioning of delight, we go off into our delight together. So we're leading each other through this channel of perception, and the mind goes towards building all kinds of stuff. So just see if that's happening. It may not. You may be completely stable, relaxed, concentrated even. I don't know. So observing the process of perception, and of course that will be visual, auditory perception. You can notice anything else, the perceptions of the mind objects internally, the body, and the naming of it as you enter the world of language together, and what is actually happening in that can be noticed in the refinement of pausing, relaxing, opening, at the urge, at the verge of the flux of perceiving. That's the emergence. And something that we explore pretty carefully sometimes in Speak the Truth is we're finding the direct experience and language coming with it to express it. It's dependent on, an indicator of Sanya, perception. Okay. So the most direct piece is simply the perceiving process that's happening, how that is then going into language and what's happening with that between you. May your practice be a benefit, and we'll get back together at 15 minutes after the hour. Thank you. I hope your practice was good, beneficial in some way. So this would be a good time to explore any questions that came up, any observations from your practice, anything that might benefit your practice going forward.
Sure, a question. So perception can be bare of any words?
It can be simply perceived qualities. It is a very quick link that the mind makes between those qualities, having names or words, and the for example, your shirt. I can look at just perceived a quality. That quality, however, is quickly labeled by this mind as yellow. But the experience, the experience of the perception is just red. The reason I wanted to point out the language connection was because it's quite powerful, and it both gives humans a lot of capacity, and it also makes an enormous amount of trouble. It's both. And it's therefore, in my opinion, worthy of our investigation. Yeah.
So Greg,
Mm-hmm.
of this, and we know this as yellow, most of us actually, if English is our, so is that verging onto a mental construct?
Yes. Yeah. And not language itself, of course, is a way of indexing with a simple sign, a whole archive of constructs. So I may look at your shirt, and yellow may make me feel a certain way because of something my mother wore 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. And likewise, I could perceive woman, or I could perceive man, or I could perceive dog, and have all kinds of feelings that come up out of that. So in the same way, when I perceive yellow on the shirt, I may have a pleasant feeling associated with it appearing to me soft, and it makes me think of a soft experience of, my skin being touched by something soft or something like that. So the continuum of feeling, perception, constructions is exactly what I was talking about when referring to these things being interwoven. And yet, by giving attention to any one of them, or each one of them in turn, or to providing some kind of the way the aggregates provide a specific lens, or a specific kind of tenuous or fluid map of the totality of experience, there's value in that. But there's not finality, there's not reality, there's not complete discretion among these different groupings. That's very important to remember. Although, go ahead and forget it, and then try and find something discrete and let it drive you crazy. And then you'll find it's not discrete. You say, I thought it was, and you'll see it isn't. That's what happened to me for quite a long time. I thought these aggregates were somethings. And I was finally, I think I may have even told you this story. I couldn't get any closer to experience that would let me separate Vedana and Sanna. And I was just going nuts, because I thought that Vedana was Vedana, Sanna was Sanna, never the twain shall meet. And yet when you come right down to where there's contact, they both arise out of contact, pasa. Pasa, pachaya, vedana. We could also be saying pasa, pachaya, sanya, but vedana is what we need for dependent origination, feeling. So dependent upon contact, pasa, pachaya, is the conditioned arising of feeling, vedana. But right there is sanya, right? And I didn't have resolution until I happened to find in the sutras where the Buddha is saying, oh yeah, no, you can't separate those. So thanks for telling me now after a year or two of insanity. But that was good. It was good work. I appreciated it because it brings you right down to the emergent little sprout of experience. And the same, and to answer your question, and the same is true with the sankharas, with the formations, constructions. And Dao was asking about how does memory come in? It's another good example, right? Memory is built around, or you might say, I think its proper home is in fabrications, khandhas, and in the archive of experience of things that we have been told, things that we remember either in language or objects that we remember seeing, this kind of thing. But how can you separate that from the object and the naming of the object? If you've never seen it before, maybe you've had this experience. You're looking at something, you just don't know what it is, or even a word, and you don't know what the word is because you've never seen it before, and kind of blink, and finally, something falls into place, and you're working right at that edge of sanya and sankhara with memory, because it's cognizing, not recognizing. You're not recognizing the word, so it's kind of disorienting. Because why? Because the organism wants to know, it wants to understand, it wants to get the world laid out so it can feel safe and control. And that's not possible, not in any lasting sense. And that's why they're suffering. So it's all wonderfully, the teachings are just completely interlaced around this teaching on the khandhas, the origin and the cessation.
In watching the unfolding of the process, and just what you've said, the suffering, and the moment of a word arising from all this that happens so rapidly. There is energy, and there is it's getting very close without, it's all like without touching. It's just close to the experience. And sometimes it's feeling, or something in the body and in the mind, not having the word yet. And the waiting in there can be like sitting with discovery, having the patience for the discovery. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of room to play.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of room to play, perhaps when you're meditating or when you're very patient with life. Usually there is not. Usually there is reaction, and you don't know what you're reacting to, but some feeling comes up and out comes the reaction. Let's say the feeling is a bodily sensation associated with a thought that comes from the sankhara, from the constructed archive, and it's out comes some sort of way of reacting. I might react to you and something you said based on this feeling, And it could be a reaction of anger because the feeling is one of, let's say, behind some kind of fear of being dismissed or left out. And I get angry at you when you say something that maybe you didn't intend that way, but it touched me in a certain way. Okay. There's no room to play there. That's just clinging and reaction and suffering. Boom, boom, boom. So when we meditate, it's very easy to say, oh, wow, this is actually kind of interesting, kind of cool, but that's because we're taking the time, and what's happening is we're the process of grasping and reaction is being, let's say, softened or diminished. The clinging is less. And so the suffering is, of course, less. And of course, it can be interesting or playful or something. But that's because you're being skillful and you're being intentional. And your practice and the Dhamma is aiming your practice in that way towards that skill. Right? So I just wouldn't want to be too like, oh, well, life is always playful like that. No, life is mostly reaction and identification and pain, and we're on a path that is otherwise. And let's look at that path, and aren't we happy about it? I am,
The sense of context was very important. The knowing that it's just this,
Mm-hmm.
it's just now.
Right. In which case there is the, if I go back to sort of, you have the contact with, let's say, the words that have been spoken or the person that you see, the contact, and up comes Vedana Sanya. In fact, Vedana Sanya, Sankara all have their birth or their nutriment, their food in contact. So moment by moment, this Sanya is happening, perceiving is happening, and it's being fed by this ongoing flux of contact. And of course, the teaching inherent in that is, how is what is dependent on something that's impermanent be permanent? So how could perception be permanent, reliable, and stable if it's arising based on contact? And that contact is obviously constantly fluxing. Well, perception is going to be constantly fluxing. Feeling is going to be constantly fluxing. And that is not okay to the organism that is fearful and wants control. That is not okay to the self, because the self is itself a formed construct looking for security, looking for stability, and can't find it. And that's basic. And then there's the diminishing, right? The fading. And it's exactly the fading of the holding to form, the holding to feelings, the holding to perceptions, the holding to fabrications, and the holding to consciousness. That is what is talked about as cessation.
Do you have some questions that you're...
I was going to, let me just give you this. Okay, so we'll start out with the perception, since that's what we were working today. Perception, Ananda, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to cessation. Through its cessation, cessation is spoken of. Okay, so that's obviously the Buddha speaking to his cousin and attendant, Ananda. And so when we talk about what's ceasing, it's nothing other than these aggregates. It may sound a little abstract here, but if I invited you right back into practice, you could you know, begin to feel that edge. And that's what I recommend. You know, you want to engage in this as an ongoing practice. You know, with care, gently, you could do so. Sorry, whoever I interrupted. I'm sorry.
I was just noticing in the contemplation how really being allowed to pause the way we are in this practice, how many different experiences that just came like one after another. And something that struck me was that I usually never notice that, because life is, I think Delia just said it, it just goes so fast. But by really allowing to pause and really connect with each moment, and just allowing to stay in the pause and really allow to be aware of what am I touching. It was like I just wanted to stay there and dig into it and kind of go deeper and deeper.
Beautiful.
And there was something new for me in that. I just really felt this wisdom of this practice, and a longing to go deeper, to understand, knowing that here is really something to get. What did the Buddha get out of this? Yeah, there was this longing and wanting. And
yeah.
Very profound.
Very.
It's such a short time.
Very profound. Thank you, Kari. I feel a social obligation to say that we've just crossed the boundary of the formal ending time. I'm willing to stay longer. This is very rich. However, anybody who needs to leave should feel completely unabashed. Just feel free to do so with honor and respect. Thank you for coming. And we'll stay up another, say, 10 minutes, okay?
I'd just like to share, which might be quite helpful, that the Pali word sanya is, makes the literal translation is like together, sanya, knowing. Like in experience, really, you cannot separate, or the intention to purely, stay with form and colors is nearly impossible. It is possible when the mind is very calm and you're very quiet, but it just comes, as was pointed out before, so much together with the other khandhas, and then perception, just seeing the meditation partner, naming, labeling, it's coming together all at once. That's a felt sense of experience.
Yeah. And because the self is built up, as this, in the same way that all these other perceptions are built up, when the mind does become very calm, and objects and the naming of objects can melt away, and the whole sense of self and body can melt away, because as we pointed out, and I hope you had the experience of maybe touching the edges of it, the body is just a percept as well. So there's nothing but the fluxing of contact, and the perception comes up out of that as my body or this body and all of its details. That begins to dissolve. And if we're not well grounded in, so I'll start by saying in tranquility, in relax, in insight dialogue terms. And if we're not given a Dhamma context that lets us know we're not going insane, this can be very scary. It doesn't have to be. If we are relaxed and we do have a context, it can be bearable and, and lead to, great fruit. So it's good to know that we're, practicing in a way that is kind and hopefully sufficiently intelligent.
So I was noticing as you were listing the series of events that lead to cessation, the word cessation, that cessation associated with stopping, and it doesn't feel like a stopping, but I guess I'm asking, why do I perceive the word cessation being stopping after that series of events you talked about in the Sutta?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would guess that what is being experienced is perhaps the notion that a thing is stopping, whereas if it's understood that the thing never existed to begin with, that it's just process, that the process comes to, that there's a cessation of that process, that there's no thing that stops. That's what I would presume is the kind of the jump in the mind. Why does it seem like this thing stops? Because there's a perceived thing there, and then it's kind of, that's discordant, because really what we're talking about is a flow and the cessation of the flow. So just to read that again for you, let's take Vedana, feelings this time. Feeling, Ananda, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to cessation. Through its cessation is spoken of. So obviously the initial question that Ananda was asking was, what is cessation referring to? What is ceasing? And the Buddha is going with this reply that kind of really unpacks the insubstantiality all the way through. So, yeah. Inherent in the clinging is, I am feeling this. I am experiencing this perception. I am this perception. And you'll see that gets very subtle when we get to consciousness. I am this consciousness. Whoa, yeah, of course I am, it seems. Of course I am. But it's just flux. The same with perceptions right now as I'm speaking and you're hearing.
Cessation is just in that moment, though, isn't it? Because that same thought or perception can reoccur, and then there's another cessation as the attention is directed elsewhere. But if one is believing the perceptions, there can be a theme that comes and goes, or proliferates in that moment, whatever's going on.
Yeah.
So there are lots of cessations, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Of the same thing, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very, very good observation. And it's interesting. I don't remember the whole sequence in this discourse, but the Buddha's got these, better to have, just a moment's experience, like an experience of a meal with giving, an experience of just one bite with giving, and then and goes to experience of loving kindness is even, just a moment of loving kindness, and the final arrival point is even just I don't remember the simile, but a flash, basically an instant of impermanence is like outshines all of these other things of generosity, loving kindness, all these different kinds of intelligences or whatever. Just a flash of the vanishing. And it is, you might say, the central insight experience of the tradition, because it is the root from which one comes to apprehend, to directly feel the emptiness of self and to let go in a fundamental way, because it's clearly nothing to hold on to and nothing to do the holding. It's like a whole shift of perspective. So it is instant by instant, and there is, as you're saying, always the next instant. At the same time, there's also the arising of a perspective shift that is so powerful that it shifts your view, samaditi, and that's samaditi, or the arising of wisdom, right view. The arising of wisdom is right there, and so one still experiences things, but that is without attachment. And that is, when the insight is sufficiently profound, that is enduring. Sort of sometimes likened to when you know how a magic trick is done, you can't unknow that. It's like, oh, he's just, got it up his sleeve, or he's standing behind the curtains with the levers and the pulleys. That's how it's done. And so you can see the person sawn in half or lifted up into the air or something disappear. It's like, oh yeah, whatever. It doesn't capture you. And the magic show of consciousness is like that. So that's probably a good place to stop. I hope your magic show for the next week is filled with the pleasant and not the unpleasant, and whatever clinging there is may at least be clinging to something pleasant. And perhaps there'll be moments of non-clinging. I wish that for you even more. And perhaps a moment of cessation. I wish that for you even more. So we get a better and better sense as we learn more of the nature of suffering. And so when we think about all beings, and the suffering that's out there, perhaps we can appreciate the desperate grasping that comprises the life of most beings, humans, animals, the whole works. And let the heart vibrate with that. And may our time together, our practice together, serve to alleviate our suffering as individuals, as a community, and the suffering of all beings everywhere, without exception. Without exception. May there be peace. May there be peace. May there be peace. Thank you very much, friends.